You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast. This is the show where you get the best tips, tricks, and nutritional hacks to help you and your family get healthier. You'll also hear what works and what doesn't work so you don't have to waste your time and money. All right, let's get started.
Hello, my name is Dr. Tony Martin Jr.
And I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctor Is In podcast, and this is episode 109. And on today's episode, we want to talk about something that's actually, so prevalent in the news today, and that has to do with pain. And specifically, what people are hearing about a lot are, the amount of deaths that are taking place right now as a result of, a real chronic addiction. And so maybe you want to talk about that to start off
Well,
with?
just that, it's just something that I never saw before, right? I mean, when you think about how long we've been in practice and, the Martin Clinic, did you ever have to deal with opioids or, I've seen addiction, right? But I never really understood how addictive and how crisis-orientated these opioids are, right? And if anybody that's listening to us has ever suffered with chronic pain, terrible having to live with pain, right? I mean, the quality of life is affected big time. But who would have ever thought that thousands and thousands and thousands of people would be addicted?
Well, and that's a sad thing.
And die even.
Like you said, being in practice for as long as we have, over the years you've seen, I have some that stand out in my head where somebody came in and you could see they were addicted to oxys. They started off with an injury. Some doctor somewhere prescribed an oxy, and that was it. It was game over. I mean, you can see the effect that it had. I could think of a few instances where it's ruined their life.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of money in opioids, a lot of money. It's a big business. A lot of interesting news articles are getting written now on the profit involved and, really the malpractice involved in this. Big Pharma has made a lot of money off this.
And nobody called them on it. I always talk about, something that happened years ago because this had to do with pain. Do you know that, less than 20 years ago, just people don't talk about this, but I try and remind people of this every once in a while just so that they don't forget. There was a medication on the market for pain. It was an anti-inflammatory, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory called Vioxx. And Vioxx, listen to this, and nobody went to jail. Vioxx killed 50,000 people. 50,000 people died. The makers of Vioxx knew of the deaths that were coming. They put money away out of the billions of dollars to settle their lawsuits. And 50,000 people died from a medication that they eventually took off the market, and nobody went to jail. So, not one person did any jail time over that thing. So you think of Purdue and opioids and OxyContin, and it's a crime.
Well, it's a big industry,
crime.
Right? There are a lot of people that have chronic pain.
Yeah. And you know what? If you're at the end of your life and you got,
we're not saying there's not a place for some of these, but that place is not that common.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely, somebody, it used to be that if somebody hurt their back bad enough, their doctors would prescribe oxys. If you're a male, especially of a certain age, you got to run from those things.
Yeah.
I mean, you just do not want.
One dose is enough to get you
you just
addicted.
do not want to give the opportunity to become addicted to those things because, I mean, it's a bad addiction. Yeah. People will do anything to get those. It's sad.
Yeah, they'll rob their grandma for that, money for that.
Let's talk about pain because, I mean, that's the original reason why these things are used. Inflammation, Vioxx, at the end of the day, Vioxx was given for inflammation, but really it was given for pain because That's what it was. It was a pain medication. I mean, I know it's an anti-inflammatory, but it's not like you go to the doctor and say, I have inflammation, but I have no pain. No, they would go in, they'd say, hey, I got a backache. So the doctor would say, okay, take this Vioxx for the back pain, but it's because it's going to get rid of inflammation. So when we're talking about pain, there's two things to keep in mind. One, we use this analogy in our clinic, and it's a good analogy. So imagine, I blame you for this. I mean, I come from a long line of non-handy people. I mean, we got no skill at all. I mean, zero.
My wife says, your mother says, I'm dangerous with a tool in my hand.
Well,
except I'm pretty good with a remote.
I remember two instances in my life of mom crying, and both of them involved you with a paintbrush in your hand. And so I've seen the bathroom that you painted growing up. It was a disaster. I mean, in a kindergarten class with a paintbrush, they could do a better job. So I understand.
I flunked art.
I understand my limitations. I understand
where they come from.
I know. I understand this. We have no skill, right? I mean, if I go and bring my car in to a mechanic, I got a good friend that's a mechanic. I trust him because I remember years ago when I was living in Chicago, when I was going to school there, I was listening to a radio program, and talk radio used to be really big, especially back in the 90s. It was a big thing. And I remember listening to a talk radio program, and basically what it was these callers who would call in anonymously, and they would do this for like an hour over lunchtime on a Friday, and they would basically talk about how they rip people off. And it was all anonymous, right? And for example, like a lawyer would call a client specifically knowing that the client's not there and bill him for like 15 minutes of his time. Or a mechanic would call in, and this is what they would do, is they would, when they're talking to somebody, they would use a wrong term that if anybody knew anything about cars, they would say, they'd correct them.
Yeah.
And if you didn't correct them, they would know that you don't know anything about cars.
And now, guess what?
Well, that's right. Then all of a sudden, all these things are wrong with the car. That would be me. I have to describe it, basically in the general area, whether it sounds funny, right? But anyways, here's the analogy that we use a lot when it comes to pain. Imagine you're driving in your car, and then all of a sudden your engine starts making a lot of noises, right? It doesn't sound right. What I do is turn up the radio. Sure, I can't hear the sound anymore, but the problem is still there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's how pain medications work. Now, sometimes the noise is so loud, you have to turn up the radio. The problem is so much, and that's what pain medication comes in. The pain is unbearable. Yeah. You take a pain medication.
Take the edge off.
It clips that wire, that pain. Doesn't mean the problem is gone in any way. It just takes that edge off. So I understand that. I mean, I've played sports. I've been injured. I understand pain, right? I mean, not as it's a really a relative thing, because treating sports injuries for all those years, somebody would come in and I would say, well, what's your pain on a scale of 1 to 10, and they would say 13. So basically, 10 being the worst pain they can imagine, they're 13, yet they walked in, right? I mean, they don't get the idea that 10, if you can't possibly think of a worse thing than this, and you said 13, that's bad. I mean, we all watch movies with different torture scenes or whatever. I mean, I could imagine but anyway, so pain's a very subjective thing. Yeah. So I understand with pain medication, that's what happens. They take it to clip that pain, that get rid of that edge, but they're just turning up the radio. They're not fixing the problem. When we're talking about pain, we like to talk about cause and effect. The cause of pain is inflammation. So when we talk about getting rid of pain, especially chronic pain, you have to find that source of chronic inflammation, and you have to deal with that. So that's what we're going to talk about. There are a lot of causes of inflammation, because, a lot of times people say inflammation is the root of all the problems, but inflammation doesn't just spontaneously show up. However, if you were to reverse engineer pain, somewhere before that, there's inflammation. So let's talk about how, from a natural standpoint, a person can lower or get rid of inflammation? Because that's what people ask us all the time. They're in pain. They're taking an over-the-counter medication, or they were prescribed oxys and they're nervous about taking it. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how a person, from a natural point of view, can deal with pain.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people, like you say, with our severe arthritises or, rheumatoid arthritis or whatever, in terrible pain. Let's start with diet, because I always like to talk about the importance of lowering inflammatory factors from your diet.
So to make this interesting, let's talk about pro-inflammatory eating.
Okay.
Let's talk about how a person would eat to increase inflammation.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about how you would eat to get rid of inflammation.
Okay.
So let's talk about that. How does a person eat that leads to inflammation, which can, for some people, lead to pain? Not everybody's going to get pain from high inflammation. They may get heart disease.
Yeah. They might have no symptoms other than fatigue.
But let's talk about what does a typical diet look like?
Well, what is pro-inflammatory more than sugar, right? Sugar is a very inflammatory product. Again, I think of somebody that I had in the office today, and they were telling me, as long as I eat good, my pain's pretty good, right? Like if they know right away as soon as they eat, their joints are sore. Well, you know what? Think of where uric acid comes from, right? Uric acid is crystallizing in the blood stream. Loves joints. If you can't eliminate your uric acid, and uric acid comes from insulin resistance. You build a lot of uric acid, your body becomes acidic with insulin, right?
There's one thing that we can say for certain is that a high circulating insulin leads to inflammation, right? High stress. A couple episodes ago, we talked about the adrenal glands. A person that has high levels of stress, physical, eating, whatever, they have high cortisol, they end up with high inflammation. And the reason for that is, again, because cortisol messes around with your insulin levels, which leads to elevated inflammation. So at the end of the day, when we say a pro-inflammatory diet, what we're really saying is a pro-insulin elevating diet.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it always comes down to insulin. The more of an issue that somebody has with insulin, the more inflammation they have, and the more likely they are to have joint issues as a result of it.
Yeah.
In fact, we did an episode on joint pain, and we called it 2 surprising causes of joint pain that nobody thinks about. And it's the cause of a majority of joint issues, especially for people. I'm not talking about the person who blew out their knee and had 3 surgeries and now has knee pain. I'm talking about the average person who has joint pain, not from athletics or, typical
injuries.
Yeah. It has to, in the podcast, we talked about leaky gut is a big source of joint pain because there's an absolute connection between the gut and your joints, and then also insulin. And so when it comes to lowering inflammation, you have to lower insulin.
Yeah.
Now, just as an aside, really quickly, we wrote about a study in a newsletter maybe 6-8 weeks ago about how they're finding out that arthritis is not, it used to be called the wear and tear, but it's actually the lack of wear and tear that they're starting to see, right? It's not that it's overuse, it's actually an underuse, but that's a podcast, a topic for another time. But all right, so if you want to increase inflammation, you increase your insulin. So obviously the opposite of that is true.
Yeah.
You want to lower inflammation, you want to lower insulin.
You want to lower insulin. You want to lower your vegetable oils. We talk about that, those industrial oils, everything from crackers, anything packaged goods. There's a reason they last a long time in a package. It's because of those vegetable oils, right? They are very pro-inflammatory, right? And so you try they elevate your insulin too. just like, sugar and carbohydrates, crappy carbs that we talk about all the time. But when you look at packaged goods that are made with vegetable oils, those are very inflammatory. You want to cut those down.
And which brings us to, the ketogenic diet and pain. There are some very good studies that have shown how good a ketogenic diet is for pain, how good it is to recover from an injury. Good studies showing that if you want to recover quicker from an injury, you go into a ketogenic diet, right? Cut your carbs down low enough that you're burning ketones for energy. You heal faster.
Yeah.
Your body heals faster. You want to get rid of pain, lower your insulin down. Now, for many that are listening, you don't actually have to go low enough to get into ketosis, but you can lower your carbs, cut out, as you mentioned, those vegetable oils, sugar, and it's amazing what happens to pain.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, I find this interesting. Insulin is a food hormone. We talk about that all the time. Insulin is present when you're eating food, and obviously because it's helping your body get rid of that toxic glucose that ends up in your blood. So insulin is a food hormone. What I find interesting is that one of the big problems that is happening today has to do with the fact that there are some things that we consume that aren't food, in a sense that they have no calories, that will elevate your insulin. The chemical that is in that food or, sweetener or whatever actually will have an effect on our insulin levels, which is scary when you think about it, because insulin is supposed to be involved when you're eating food. It's no wonder why we're seeing so much more chronic pain, joint problems. And one of the other issues that, we probably should talk about when we're talking about joint pain or pain specifically is, something that you talk about a lot, which is glycation.
Yeah, glycation end products, AGE, right? Aging. It literally is, too, because glycation is the result of sugar, again, right? It's sort of like an oxidative damage to the joints, causes a lot of issue in the blood vessels and all that. And glycation is a real issue for sure.
Yeah, and whenever I think of glycation, I always think of caramelization, right? It's that process of glycation is what happens when something is caramelized. And you could, just envision that process of caramelization, how sticky, that browning. By the way, my wife's from Wisconsin, and, one of the eternal debates we have is the pronunciation of caramel. Of course, because it's spelled C-A-R-A, I say caramel. But if you go into Wisconsin or you go into the Midwest, it's caramel. They just act like that A is not there. So I know I'm right, but that's another issue. However, so you think of that caramelization of joints. So when a person has a high sugar diet, they consume a lot of sugars, a lot of fructose. That same thing. Orthopedic surgeons will talk about going into a shoulder, going into a knee, and it looks like caramel. It looks like it's just been caramelized.
Yeah.
That leads to decreased range of motion. It leads
blood
to
supply,
pain, blood, everything, right? Yeah, orthopedic surgeon will
aging of the joint, even without injury, aging of really it's rusting out, right?
And that's exactly what's happening. Yeah. It's the rusting out of joints, and that happens again because of chronically elevated insulin. It leads to not only inflammation, it leads to
caramel or caramel,
caramelization of the joints. Yeah, that's a big...
Fascinating, isn't it?
It is. It really is. So, again, if you're listening and you have chronic pain or you want to recover from an injury faster, then we would strongly recommend looking at lowering your carbohydrates and definitely eliminating sugar, eliminating those white flours. getting rid of those vegetable oils, those processed foods. It's amazing because you see this all the time.
Yeah.
It's amazing what that does to chronic pain. Now, let's talk just quickly as we end this episode off about a couple of nutrients that you use in the clinic to help people with natural pain.
Well, I love oil, right? I'm always big on oil. I love olive oil, coconut oil, fish oil. We're big on high DHA fish oil, very anti-inflammatory. I tell my patients with severe pain, slide out of rooms. You're taking so much good oil. Healthy fat. Butter is a healthy fat. Coconut oil, love that stuff. And then, our Navitol. And Navitol is so good because it's very anti-inflammatory for reasons that, we know what it does, right?
Yeah, like the active ingredient in Navitol is pine bark extract. And the amount that we use in our formula, it does a few things, right? First of all, pine bark has been shown to be a natural COX-2 inhibitor.
Yeah.
And if you remember, a lot of those
like Celebrex, Vioxx that we talked about.
Yeah, they were synthetic COX-2 inhibitors, and they caused a lot of issues. Whereas pine bark is a natural COX-2 inhibitor, so it does have the ability to help with pain, but it also has the ability to help with inflammation. So, very, very good for pain, for joints. It promotes blood flow, right? I mean, pine bark extract is so good at opening up blood vessels because it boosts nitric oxide. So it makes blood flow better. And if blood can get in and out of an area a lot better, it just heals faster. So we're big fans of pine bark. So you mentioned DHA or oils.
Turmeric. I love curcumin, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an
absolutely
Indian spice. Tremendous, very anti-inflammatory. Vitamin D is shown to have tremendous benefits as an anti-inflammatory, how it operates. It's very anti-inflammatory in the body. So, I mean, you ought to be taking vitamin D. I love vitamin D for inflammation, too.
And, we have a formula, we call it inflammation formula. And one of the things that's in there as well that we like a lot is the green-lipped mussel extract. Yeah. I mean, it's tremendous for anti-inflammatory reasons. So there are the point is this. There are a lot of things out there that you can do from a natural standpoint to help with pain and to help with chronic pain. It starts really with what you put into your mouth when you eat.
Yep.
Every time you're eating food, it can start this cascade of events that will lead to elevated inflammation, which will cause you more pain. So if you've got chronic pain, you cannot dismiss what you're eating at all. That has to be the starting point. Really control that insulin. And then there are also natural nutrients that we love that, we use in the clinic. You see results when it comes to pain all the time. So they are out there. I know our natural tendency is to, reach for that, that pain medication that's going to clip the wire. And again, we're not saying there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
But if you find yourself doing that often, there's a reason for that. It's elevated inflammation. So you have to address that problem specifically. So we're out of time. We want to thank you for listening to this episode. If you have any questions, you can email us at info@martinclinic.com. You can also, if you're not a newsletter subscriber, go to our website, martinclinic.com, and sign up. We talk about a lot of these things. We would really appreciate if you would leave us a review as well on iTunes. That would help us out tremendously. So if you're listening on iTunes, right in the app, you can leave us a real quick review. We would really appreciate that. So again, thanks for listening, and be sure to tune in again next week.